history and Indian intellectual literary traditions, then we have to understand, we are looking at understanding of Indian cultural heritage, pre-colonial, and then later, Indian intellectual traditions. We talk of Indian aesthetics. If you're looking at Indian history, you divide it into four periods. Ancient India, which is Vedic and classical, early modern period, which is from 1526 to 1850. The British colonial period, which is from 1526 again to 1850 and post-independence, that's 1947 onward. Now, we have always been initiating the argument that was being made was that we were not, that our tradition or our intellectual processes were not rational and scientific. But the point I want to make here very quickly is that the Indian intellectual tradition is continuous and cumulative tradition of thinkers. There are texts, there are conceptual structures and theories in different areas of human thought and experience. Primary texts, there are a lot of primary texts which are still available in the intellectual fields of philosophy, medicine, grammar, architecture, geography, literary theory, political economy, logic, astronomy, military science, sociology, metallurgy, agriculture, mining, and shipbuilding. Now, having said this, I will just cut across to something that was that when NEP was being implemented, I used to deliver a lot of lectures in which I pointed out that when Macaulay came to India, he decided to do a survey, and out of all the villages, over 3 lakh villages, every single village, not the towns, the villages themselves too had some form of a school, whether it was a madrasa or it was a Vedic Pathshala or it was a Gurukul, some form existed. Documented in our records, because they undertook a survey which has been documented in the records by major British people who were governing at that time. In the Bombay presidency itself, there is documented evidence in the records that in the Bombay presidency, which extended from Bombay, a part of Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and went right up to Pakistan, you will be surprised to know that there were almost over 12,000 higher education institutions. These higher education institutions definitely were in these intellectual fields of whether it was philosophy, medicine, grammar, architecture, geography, politics, medicine, metallurgy, agriculture, architecture, shipbuilding. And by the time, and the literacy rate of India at that time has been documented at 98%. And by the time the British left, in 1947, our literacy rate had fallen to 9%. So by dismantling, to say that we never had a tradition is so completely wrong. And I do not want to go into the politics of it. But I'm sure for those of us who are here and who are listening in and who are as part of the system, we do understand how this played out, why it played out, and why it is important for us to bring back these traditions into the system. One argument, because I'm on the implementation committee of NEP for the Chief Minister's group, as part of for the literature and culture component, I have argued that whenever now we should seriously consider that when you are doing a study, when you're doing a piece of research in any university, we do something known as a literature review. Why is it that in our own subject, in our own discipline, we do not go to review any piece of literature that may exist of the topic that we have selected? Why do we not include that? We have never done that. So whether you're talking of metallurgy or when you talk of sociology or agriculture, there have been practices, there are texts, and a lot of texts available which you need to refer to, and then you need to see whether what area that you've chosen for research, if anything can be drawn from there. We'll completely shut that out. And through a very Western prism, we are constantly and consistently looking at only the Western structures and wanting to applicate them to our system, blissfully failing sometimes, and always being accused that our research is not up to the mark. Because the West is not really looking at us presenting their point of view, they're also looking at what we can give them. You will be surprised to know I delivered a lecture on the Indian knowledge tradition at the Florida State University. And there were, in USA alone, 25 seats have been professors has been created in Sanskrit. They're now getting full-blown interest in Sanskrit because they want to source our texts. But we have never ever thought that our texts were of any use. So why I want to focus here is on, if you just look at some disciplines and their texts, if you go to philosophy in Darshan, there are 6 theistic systems. There's Mimamsa, Vedanta, Nyaya, Vaisheshiki, Samarthya, and Yoga. Dharmashastra mein jaiye, which deals with social individual life and conduct. You have Manusmriti, you have Parashat Samhita and others. Go to Ayurveda, you have Charak Samhita and Sushruta Samhita. Ab aapko innumerable reels you will find where you're very happy to see people from America and everywhere else. Sushruta was the first, surgeon who actually was doing, restructuring and recreating the human body through surgery with very basic tools. But Sushruta is definitely considered to be a plastic surgeon, the first plastic surgeon that the world ever had. And then we have the Charak Samhita. So now we are willing to accept it because it's coming to us from the acknowledgement and acceptance from the West. That is something that we need to think about. If you look at Vyakaran or grammar, the Ashtadhyayi, Vakyapadi hai. If you look at politics, Niti, there's the Arthashastra. You want to look at literary theory, there's the Kavya Shastra. There is Itihas Puran or history and mythical chronicles, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and the Puran. So, I really wanted to quickly focus on convincing you that how is Indian aesthetics a tradition? You see, Indian aesthetics is a tradition because the Indian knowledge system is a tradition because by virtue of continuity and cumulativeness of texts and thinkers. So, in each of the disciplines that we are talking about and more, there is always the texts are there and there are thinkers. And there will be people agree where people disagree. But all those texts cumulatively are available and they add to the tradition and gives the flexibility and the freedom for the reader or the inquirer or the person investigating to actually get into interpreting it his way, putting his own thought. So even if you dissent, if you disagree with the thing, your theory still exists. It is documented. So there's a continuity and cumulativeness of texts and thinkers. Now, the Indian tradition, knowledge tradition, is a very powerful interpretive literature built around the primary text. And that enriches and enhances the thought in each discipline. So, there is a source text, there will be primary text, some Sangra texts, recensions, and a long line of commentaries on them. So, for example, let's look at aesthetic theory because that's what I've taught. So, there's the Natya Shastra by Bharatpuri. Then there is the primary text, the Dhvanyalok or Chitya Vichara. Then there are Samgra texts like the Kavya Mimamsa by Rajshekhar, etc. And all these belong to the tradition and they're very much there. Now, the tradition is empirical. What the West accuses us of is that, there is no scientific basis for this, etc., etc. Let me just bring you to, I will come to explain, when I finish this bit on why it is a tradition, then I will come back to talking about why it is, how it fits the scientific framework. So the conceptual structures which are propounded by primary texts, they are products of actual practice and observation. So we don't require the investigation or the process that the West follows. For example, there is an idea or a notion, then it is tested through various theories, and then there is the researcher comes out with findings, right? Now, if you look at the science disciplines, there will be an experiment that will be conducted. There will be, after the experiment is conducted, there will be observations. After observations, the conclusions come. It is very, very important for us to understand we did not need to go through this because not a single theory that exists in the Indian knowledge tradition is not based on actual practice and observation. Let me give you just an idea by giving you a common example with which the Westerners understood very fast. I said, if you look at the Kama Sutra, it's one of the texts in our tradition. And in Kama Sutra, whatever is described, multiple things. We only look at sexual postures. That's not all that there is. It's a lot of study about how to, it's the process of love. How you prepare for love? How does it happen? So when the research, whatever research was being done, whatever is there in the text, comes from actual life observation. The author used to peak whatever, even when you look at the various postures that have been described, they do not come out of the man's imagination. It comes out of something that was being practiced at that time, which he had observed and which he had documented. So the conceptual structures propounded by our primary texts are products of actual practice and documentation, and observation which are documented. So primary texts are not usually normative. After they acquire the status in the intellectual tradition, it is useful for them to begin to operate as normative texts. And since our tradition is oral, we must remember that the tradition is oral. It is language centered. The Shabda is crucial, and care is taken. A lot of care is taken to define the terms as precisely as possible. So terms are almost always interdisciplinary, and at the same time, they are ordinary language words. So transdisciplinary character of concepts in the Indian intellectual tradition and categories in this tradition exist. Thinkers have constantly been searching for one ultimate principle on structure, explaining diverse phenomena from mundane to the divine. So it's not just that, so out of your observation is also the quest for understanding the principle of the structure and how these diverse phenomena can be linked to the divine. So there is always this pursuit of knowledge. We always say that, all disciplines of knowledge lead to the same point, which is the understanding of human life and understanding of human existence, which is actually a spiritual idea. If you read a text like the Tao of Physics, or you look at the post of Oppenheimer, if you look at any of the scientists who have operated and worked, they've all been drawn to the spiritual aspect of Indian culture. So let's see, for example, a rust hill. Rust शब्द जो है basically chemistry से आता है. It is used in medicine, it is used in cooking, and it is used in literary aesthetics to explain how we enjoy aesthetic pleasure, how aesthetic pleasure is aroused. So, art is a construct in both philosophy and literary aesthetics. Then there is a term, Atma Sakshatkar, self-realization. It is the goal in philosophy. It is the goal in ritual, it is the goal in medicine, and also the goal in literary experience. So, what I'm trying to say here is in the Indian intellectual tradition, no idea, no system of ideas is developed in isolation. So, cross-disciplinary character of concepts and categories is a very integral part of the Indian intellectual tradition. Rege, in one of his pieces, has written, and I quote, the Indian notions of the spiritual quest and of sadhana are an integral part of a conceptual scheme which articulates a total form of social and individual life. In a unified conceptual scheme, which defines a view of human nature, the nature of human society, social and individual ideals, and forms of self-realization based on these views. So, what I'm trying to say here, and what has been said here, is that knowledge is not an end in itself. It will justify itself by upholding dharma or the inherent equipoise in the individual, the society, and cosmos. So, you have to understand that in our species, whatever you may be doing, whatever language you may follow, whatever tradition you may come, it is eventually when it all converges at knowledge, and that knowledge, which creates an inherent equipoise between the individual and society and the cosmos. So the four ends of life are laid down in the Dharma Shastra, and they constitute the goal of learning as well. So command of both literature and language leads to moksha. This has been said, the liberation from the self. So in our tradition, I continue to tell you what the aspects of our tradition is. All knowledge is a form of meditation. Meditation or samadhi must finally lead to a mastery over the self. Otherwise, learning is a burden. It's a waste and destructive of the self or the other. So Indian thought has moved beyond the physical, and over time, it has moved from materialism to idealism, from empiricism to transcendentalism. Now, when we look at, I just wanted to, is this a largely a literature group? Are most of the participants from literature? Will someone respond?
Hello. Yes, ma'am. Most of them are from literature, but management background also.
All right, fine. So
Okay. And interdisciplinary psychology, management, and
so
sociology.
whatever I'm going to talk to you about is, will work with all. So when we look at these theories, and we are looking at, for example, let me just say, if we are looking at, just for an example, when you look at literary theories, so in literary theories, for the Indian literary theories, there is language alankar, which means principle of figurativeness. There is Vakrokti, which means principle of deviation. There is an aspect on style and compositional value, just like Guna Dosh, excellence and faults, Riti, mode of expression, or Chitta, propriety, verbal symbolism like Dhwani, right? All of this exists. And literary theories are divided according to aesthetic experience. They are called rasa. If you are focusing on narrative, they are called mahakavya, and categories of Panini's grammar. There is discourse analysis or yukti. There's comprehensive analysis of Kavya Mimamsa. There is interpretation, Shastra Paddhati. So, if you look at all of this, you realize that our aesthetic theory is far more finely tuned and finely, very finely sharpened to the human experience in comparison to the literary theories like modernism, postmodernism, and you go on and on in English literature. You keep having these theories thrust on us, Now suddenly, when you come to postmodernism, people have begun to value uh, certain things like what would I call it? Multi-perspective. Because the whole idea of everything being quiche means everybody's opinion, everybody's perspective being important is now, we can see that is important. And I'll give you an example to explain how the West has now started looking at our aesthetic theory as being more explanatory of the way human experience can be assessed, evaluated, or investigated. So when I was there in Florida, there was one student who was doing a piece on Bollywood films. She was doing a research on Bollywood films. And she kept, when I explained the Rasa Dhwani theory, and she was so engaged in it. And after it finished, she just stood up and she said, I'd like to thank you because my mind remains boggled as to how many things keep happening in a Hindi movie or in an Indian movie. I could never understand how that can coalesce to become an aesthetic experience and why Indian people enjoy movies the way they do. So then because if you look at that, I spoke to her. She said, now I understand why you get it. But could you please clarify this for me? So I told her that if you go to the rest area or you go to there are two strands in any aesthetic experience. किसी भी piece of work में there are two levels. There is a स्थायी भाव and a व्यभिचारी भाव. Style is the permanent, Vyabhachari is one that keeps intertwining with it. Right? So, supposing you take a Hindi film, right? So, take an English film. In an English film, you only have one single line. Style bhav. So, if it is an adventure, it's just an adventure. If it is a space thing, it's just a space thing. If it is nothing else, they will not deviate. If it's a space excursion, it's space excursion. If it's a train which has run away and they're trying to stop it, they're trying to stop it. If there's a president that's going to be killed, they're trying to save, they're trying to save. So they have just these style bhavs. They do not have these little vyabhachari bhavs. But the human mind exists of vyabhachari. For example, take a movie, Hindi movie. In a Hindi movie, you have one style bhav. Most of you may have heard of, maybe it's a revenge movie, right? So a boy gets out to take revenge. But within the revenge movie, the revenge axis remains wrapped around the revenge axis. There is a story that evolves of his love with his mother. There is a story that will revolve around the love with the woman. So you may have songs, you may have an intimate moment with the girl, you may also have this. Then the mother's emotional connection with the son and the son's relationship to the mother. There would be a boss who's helping him out in his revenge, or there may be other friends. So everything gets wrapped and built around the main bhav, right? ये व्यभिचारी भाव जो है, they wrap around the स्थायी भाव, and they feed into the main story. When you look at postmodernism talks of multiple perspectives. The Vyabhachari bhavs wrapped around the main style bhav are like multiple perspectives that are being given into the mind of the main character, into the motive of the main character, into the reasons why the person is doing what he's doing. A lot of it also gives you perspective about the story itself, its relevance, significance, it's the human element. Multiple things can come out of it if the Vyabhacharis are happening. And that's exactly what is being spoken about in postmodernism now, after all these years. In postmodernist thought and postmodernist theory, they say multiple voices, multiple perspectives. A quiche is made, that quiche is important. And that girl that they understood the concept. I explained this to her. She understood the concept of this, the quiche that is formed. And I said it has existed with us for years because we have identified the Navaras. There are 9 rasas. We do not say that there is any one rasa. There are 9 rasas. And those 9 rasas become important. And all the 9 rasas play out and feed into one another. And that's what I was trying to explain to them. And she understood it completely. So the foundation, and all of you will understand this from any discipline you come. You know, when you talk of the 8 rasas found in the Natya Shastra, there is Shringara, romance, love, attractiveness. There's Hasya, laughter, mirth, and comedy. There is Raudra, which is fury. There's Karuna, which is compassion. There's Vibhats, which is disgust or aversion. There's Bhayanak, which is horror and terror. There is Veervas, which is, heroism. And there is the Adbhut or wonder. And the other rasa that is recognized is Shant. Shant rasa was a later addition. So 8 rasa or 9 hai. Now, as Indians, you and I, when we go to see a movie, we understand and we read a novel or look at our own life experience. All of these exist within us together. There is no one. So, at some point of time in our life, one of us may be playing a major role, or maybe the style bhav. But छोटे-छोटे भाव से और जुड़े हुए होते हैं. And all of these bhavs will contribute to your experience. So when all of these rasas come, the dominant emotion जो होता है, subconscious statement, वो रस नहीं. रस does not exist before. आपके अंदर रौद्र होगा, आपके अंदर विकास होगा, लेकिन जब तक वो they will acquire a designation only when they are aesthetically presented. किसी टेक्स्ट में, किसी विजुअल टेक्स्ट में, किसी प्ले में, किसी मूवी में. So तभी उनको आएगा. तो आप देखें, ये प्रूव कर रहे हैं हम आपको कि हमारे जो टेक्स्ट या हमारी जो थ्योरीज, they are rooted in experience. And people understand it from experience. So these bhavs may remain dormant in your subconscious mind, unconscious region. They are like the types of emotive complexes. But when they take them to artistic creation, a purely universal emotional fear is aroused. They are projected in the mind and become affiliated to those kind of emotive complexes. So that keep value of it. So rasa gets created or aesthetics pleasure comes only when it is identified, transformed, or presented artistically, which makes it more universal into artistic joy or rasa. So when you experience artistic joy, there is a kinship, an identity among all of art. Now, aesthetic art, I've explained this to the girl, I'm just sharing with you what I explained to her. She understood the concept of Indian cinema just by understanding a small little idea that for us human beings, there is a primary style and Western. What is happening with Western films is, or in Western writing sometimes, that they sometimes are focused just on one fixed narrative of one fixed direction, one style. And you see that the most successful books are those which have worked on the smaller Vyabhichari bhavs to arouse them. So the aesthetic composition with its suggestive force presents before our mind an aesthetic situation and emotion which is important. Expression of an artistic enlightenment has a universal character in its manifestation. And in different minds, it will manifest differently. Why? Because it will depend on the nature and diversity of your experience. A small child may experience it differently.